Hi guys, it's me, Ash.
And me, Nicholas.
Today we have a guest to talk about his favorite deck today. Chad, if you want to introduce yourself real quick.
The name's Bond. Chad Bond.
We literally, before this, we said you were going to say that.
Yeah, we totally saw that coming.
Of course I do. I can't disappoint the fans.
Before we get into his favorite deck, though, we're going to go to our segment, Best Card From.
And today we're talking about our best cards from Arabian Nights. So, Chad, do you want to go first, middle, or last?
I'll go ahead and go last. You guys go ahead.
All right.
More time to think about this.
All right, Nick, you go ahead and start us off.
All right. Well, I mean, my pick is kind of obvious. It's one of the few good cards from this set. Of course, we all love Elephant Graveyard. I'm kidding. I mean, it's almost always going to be Library of Alexandria. It's just a very powerful card.
Fair enough. I think probably the most played card out of this set in our format is Mountain, but I was going to go with Library, and that may still be quote unquote correct, but I am going to go with City of Brass. Actually, I feel like that definitely sees more play, and I think it would, even if not for a price and point perspective, it probably still would see more play, just because it has significantly more utility across archetypes compared to Library.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, well, I decided to go ahead and complete the set. We all chose lands, which tells you something about Arabian Nights design, I guess.
Indeed.
So I'm going to go ahead and go with Bazaar of Baghdad, which is a very potentially powerful card. It's not one that I've ever played, and maybe I'll go my entire Magic career without actually playing it, but it's just such a interesting play space, just going that all in on discard.
Yeah.
And who knows, maybe one day I'll play around with it.
The kind of dedication we haven't seen since, except for Kamigawa, when they gave us 1-0.
That's a bit too much dedication.
Alright, so today we've brought a list of questions, and we're just going to be letting Chad basically elaborate on this deck that he's been playing for a while now. By the way, without your consent, I have coined a name for this deck, and it is Bond Bashing, because you just bash our face with it all the time.
I'm not sure if that's gonna stick, but
I will.
You're welcome to try.
I will at the very least try, and I am prepared for the possibility that it does not.
Hey guys, this is Ash from the editing bay. I just realized that Green Red Bond is a significantly better deck name, so we're gonna go with that. Okay, now back to the episode. Bye.
But before we get too much into the deck in specific, I'm going to ask how long you've been playing the game, and follow-up question, how long you've been playing the format.
Well, I got into Magic early on in college, which would have been early 2010s. I forget exactly when. I remember coming out to my dorm lobby and seeing a couple guys at one of the tables playing Magic, and you walk over, you ask what's going on, you watch a few games, and you wake up 6 months later and you're several dozen dollars less rich, but you're in deep. So that's where I got my start with Magic, and over years, you also got into Magic, Ash, and then you got me into Canadian Highlander specifically. I forget when exactly that would have been, but
I feel like it was, I brought it up on Discord at one point, and you were just one of the other Magic players in Discord, like in my Discord at the time, but I can't remember.
I think it was probably like a couple of years ago now, maybe 2.5.
Oh, yeah. It has to, I feel like you all are just like forgetting the year we took off.
Oh, that's true.
It's got to be like it's got to be like 3 years.
It's
by now,
be close.
At least. Yeah, I feel like it actually Canlander predates your Discord server. Actually,
that's possible.
Yeah,
it's very possible.
Yeah. I think you were like texting me to get stuff organized for it. Yeah, and I spent a long time, probably like a year or so, coming to Canlander events and just bumming decks off of you because you were the one who had this toolbox of staples and you could just put together any number of decks out of nowhere.
At the time, I actually didn't even have a toolkit. Like, when you were bumming decks, I had High Tide, and then I had the stuff for what was it? It was a Black Mold.
Yeah.
And then, like, at another point, I eventually built Esper or Blue Eye. But, like, I kind of had those three kind of separated from each other.
Yeah.
Mostly. And it was just kind of whichever one of the two I had together, and whichever one I was playing was kind of the deal.
Yeah. And so it went like that for probably about a year, and you got more staples, and you built more decks and whatnot. And eventually I said to myself, I should probably build my own deck.
Well, speaking of building your own deck,
that's a good segue into our next question, which would just be, describe your deck as you see it.
Yeah, we've kind of been burying the lead pretty strongly here. My deck is Gruul mid-range. So it's flat green, flat red. And the way I see it, kind of like going back in the origin story a bit, for the first deck I put together was Teamer mid-range, so blue, green, red, and it was a good deck. I don't want to imply that it was not a good deck, but over time I started noticing that I wasn't out-controlling the control players, and I wasn't out aggroing the aggro players, and there was sort of like this division between the dirtily blue decks and the aggressive red and green cards, and I was thinking to myself, okay, if I were going to choose a direction, which way would I want to attack the meta? And what I eventually came to was that if I, because this is Canlander, and most of the people in our meta understand how to play Canlander, and they're playing removal. No, I don't think anyone in our meta except the most new people are not playing the good efficient removal that keeps them alive. So I said to myself, well, what if I play more threats than they have removal? And then, because if you're playing like controller tempo, then you're really relying on having more answers to their answers, or else they're going to answer your threats, and then what do you got? If you're playing just more threats than they can deal with, or threats that they can't deal with, then you're just gonna win. So what I'm playing is very threat dense. I've been running the numbers and preparing for recording this episode with you guys, and I've got something like half of the cards in this deck's kill my opponent in some way.
Yeah, I'm looking at this, and it is I actively have to try to find something that doesn't kill me.
Yeah.
Yes.
And more of them than not only do they kill me, they're like you play it and I'm like, oh no. Like, I need to kill this fast.
Yeah. And that's very deliberate. Something I've really focused on as I've refined this deck is I want these cards to stand on their own. Because like I said earlier, everyone's playing removal. My cards are going to get removed. So if I play a card and it needs another card to work, then that card probably isn't going to perform very well most of the time. So nearly every one of these cards does a thing on their own.
I think you basically just perfectly described the reason I can't play aggro decks. Like, just the other week, I played Merfolk, okay?
Yeah.
And for anyone who doesn't know, Merfolk just ain't quite there yet when it comes to Highlander. And I think it could be my build. And if it is, I think part of the reason for that is play a lot of cards that like are like cards, but they say Merfolk. So I'm like, oh, my lords help them. But then of course my lord is just the one they use their removal on.
Yeah. It's definitely there's an issue with tribal decks where you can't put together the duplicates of the cards that you really need to make your deck hum. So unless you have critical mass of stuff that pushes the other cards up into greatness, then you're just going to get run over by cards that are that great on their own. And that's what my deck is trying to do, is trying to be that great on its own.
I think it does that pretty well.
Yes, it does.
I feel like you guys are just over here being my hype men, building up my deck's greatness to all the new people to come into the shop, and I'm like, yeah, it's okay, I win.
I mean, to be fair, like three or four of the newer players that have come to Highlander recently, that I've just kind of been talking to them between. I was like, oh, how are you playing? They're just like, yeah, man, I went up against Chad. And, like, there's 40 minutes left in the round. Like, it just, like, every time. And I'm like, yeah, well, he's a bully sometimes. He just kills us all. He keeps us honest. So as we go through this question, I'm sure we're going to kind of touch on stuff you've already talked about. So if you feel like there's nothing really else to add, buzz, pass, next question, or whatever. You haven't really talked too much about this, but how long have you been playing this specific build of the deck? Well, not like this 100 cards, but like since you kind of dropped the blue and kind of streamlined it, how long have you been playing this build?
I want to say, like, not counting the year we took off.
Yeah.
Probably about 2 years, I want to say, at this point. And like I've played other decks, bum decks off of you, for variety's sake, in that interim, but most of that has been this deck, and that's given me a lot of chances to really get a feel for these cards and really experience them in different situations and really iterate on this deck. And I'm probably not iterating as fast as I would be if I really wanted to get to just the most optimal version of this deck, but I feel like I really do know these cards, and if we were to lay out the full deck list for everyone, they'd probably be asking me questions like, well, why aren't you playing this, why aren't you playing that,
and we'll get to that here further down.
I'm sure we will. And I feel like, I'm sure I'm not making the optimal decision for every card in this list, but I feel like I'm at least at a place where I can defend those decisions I've been making, and I can be happy with them at least.
At the end of the day, isn't that what really matters?
Yeah.
Yeah, so our next question is just what are some of the most, like, drastic evolutions, like, for meta, just new cards, or whatever, that your deck has undergone since the creation of it?
I feel like there hasn't been a whole bunch of drastic changes. I feel like the most drastic change was we came back from taking a year off of Magic, but Magic hadn't taken a year off. So I've made like 10 different card swaps in the span of like two or 3 weeks. But even then, those are just like, this is an upgrade to this. It's not really like my deck's still the same deck. It just has different cards in it.
So, like, would you say that just like the largest, not even a question, the biggest evolution is going from the teamer tempo-y mid-range deck to just this straight, more aggressive mid-range that you're on now?
Yeah, and that was a big enough of a change that I do think of them as different decks. So okay. That's why that's not the answer I gave.
That's fair. All right. Well, as we just talked about, you used to have blue in this, and now you've for quite a while now have been just on this 2-color version. But have you ever considered, or in light of recent cards or spoilers or anything, have you considered moving into a 3rd color, whether it be blue or something else?
Not really. One of what I feel is this deck's strongest suits is just the simplicity of being a 2-color deck. So not only do I get to have better mana than someone who is playing 3 colors, like even I would say in Highlander our decks can have very good mana, and I still just see people get absolutely screwed, and then I run them over. But also, like, I get to enjoy a lot of the advantages of being a 2-color deck that maybe are not so obvious. Like, I get to run some of the more powerful 2-color lands that you might not be able to get away with in a regular deck, just because you have so many of your lands dedicated. A 3-colored. You might not be able to run all these lands in a 3-color deck just because you have to dedicate so many of your lands to making your mana base work. And also, I feel like I'm now that it's all laid out, I feel like I'm probably pushing my pips a bit more than would be wise in a 3-color deck. Like I've tried to be very conscious in the 1, 2, 3 drop space about how many color pips I dedicate myself to, because that's how you make a multicolored deck work, is you don't make yourself pay 2 red pips on turn 2 and 3 red pips on or 3 green pips on turn 3. That's just asking for trouble. But then in the 5 and 4, 5, and 6 slots, all of my cards are like 2 pips, and it's like, well, that doesn't usually cause me any troubles.
Sure, okay.
Just because I have access to so many good dual lands that I'm not embarrassed to run.
I will say I think I disagree with you a little bit on your being pip dense, because I'm looking at your 3-drop slot, and there are 20 cards in your 3-drop slot. 14 of them have Ancient Tomb mana.
Well, that's part of what I was saying. Is I'm conscious of protecting that in my 2 and 3 drop slot, but in my 4 and up slot, I'm able to be a bit free with that when it might be a bit more risky in a 3-color deck. I think that is...
So you're referring to the 4 and up where you're pretty pip dense.
Yeah.
Okay, I understand.
It's something that I don't think a lot of people really think about when they get up to that high of CMC, but they probably should, because it's going to kill you when it comes up.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
I mean, honestly, even in when I'm playing blue-white control, I will often have 5 blue mana and 1 white mana. I can't cast Elspeth. Right? Like, granted, that deck is really, really, really blue.
So if you don't want to add a 3rd color to your deck, what are some changes that you want to / plan to make to?
I'm thinking all the time about different things I can do with this deck that would change how it plays and how that might stack up against the meta. But ultimately, I think I'm happy with where it is here. I have a lot of good ways to make an early play to put my opponents on the back foot, and I have a lot of good ways to go over the top. And I could focus on pushing one of those two to a more extreme place, like cutting my high end and having more low drops, or swapping out my low drops for ramp and more high end threats. But ultimately, I'm happy with where I'm at here. And maybe if the meta shifts, I make a shift one way or the other. But right now, I'm happy.
All right. We've kind of been talking about your strengths a lot up to this point. If you have any other strengths for your deck you want to talk about, feel free. But I'm also pretty curious about what you think your biggest weaknesses in this deck are.
Yeah. It's something I've been thinking about because, it's mid-range. It's even matchup to matchup. It's how well I play out really depends on what I draw versus what my opponents draw. So it's hard to say definitively, oh, I'm weak to this, oh, I'm weak to that. One thing that I am weak to, I think, is board wipes. If you're playing a board wipe in your deck, I'm not happy to fight you, because ultimately most of my threats do come down to swinging at you with creatures who are not indestructible.
Do you have any indestructible threats? Like, you have Smuggler's Copter, which is good against sorcery speed removal.
I have, what's her name? I have Clothis, who is indestructible.
Okay. But I mean, if I wipe your board, then...
Clothis gets pretty bad.
But that's the... Well, no, that's the nice thing about Clothis is she... and I should probably tell the audience what Clothis is. So,
yeah, go ahead and read Clothis for me.
So, for one generic, a red pip and a green flip, Clothis, God of Destiny, is a legendary enchantment creature god. She is indestructible, but as long as my devotion to red and green is less than 7, Clothis isn't a creature. She's a 4 or 5, but she's not a creature unless I'm really dedicating a lot to the board. And because everyone's playing removal, she is not a creature most of the time. But that's okay, because the reason I'm playing her is her triggered ability. At the beginning of my pre-combat main phase, exile target card from graveyard. If it was a land, I can add a red mana or a green mana to my pool. Otherwise, I gain 2 life and Clothis deals 2 damage to each opponent. So that's an example of me including a threat in my deck that really attacks my opponent from an angle that they probably can't deal with. Not a lot of people are playing exile removal that targets just an enchantment, and so she's immune to all but that kind of removal as long as I don't push my devotion too high. I actually have games where I'm very strongly thinking that I pull back on devoting too much to the board so that she stays an enchantment, and she just keeps draining them for 2, turn after turn after turn.
I have to know, did you intend to make a pun right there?
I let it happen. I saw it coming and I let it happen.
Fair enough. Okay.
So, you talked about, like, your deck's strengths and weaknesses, but, like, what matchups do you think that you're favored in, and what matchups do you think that you're not really favored in?
It's that's one area where, like, the mid-rangey area of this deck comes into play, where like, you know, what did I draw? What did they draw? How do those particular cards match up against each other? It varies a lot. I think I do well against other mid-range decks because I do have a lot of different threats like Clothis that demand a particular answer, and if they don't have that particular answer, then I just get to run them over with whatever threat they didn't deal with. One area where I'm seeing myself having a lot of weakness is against combo decks, because I can run over enemies pretty quickly, but it's Canadian Highlander, so our combo decks can put together their combo pretty quickly also, and I don't have a lot of ways to deal with that. I'm running a surprisingly small amount of interaction. I counted 5 direct damage spells when I was putting this list together, and I also have a lot of creatures that can deal with the opponent's creatures, but
that's often not fast enough.
Yeah, that's often not fast enough. That's putting me behind a step if they're trying to, you know, get out faster, or it's very like...
Were you counting Bone Crusher Giant in that list?
No, I guess I should have. Yeah, I was counting that in terms of just, this is the only thing the spell can do is deal direct damage to an opponent and or creature and or planeswalker.
So I'm seeing as you were saying, I think a very small amount of interaction, but particularly a very small amount of combo interaction. What I'm seeing here is Deathrite Shaman and Scavenging Ooze to hit their graveyard instant speed. You have a Clothis, which does, but not the same way.
Not at instant speed.
Right. Magus of the Moon, which will usually beat combo decks, just because usually combo decks are 4 or 5 colors in this format.
Yeah.
Or they're 2 or 3 colors and playing artifact lands. And then Cinder Vines and Collector Roof. I think that's everything. Unless I'm missing something else. Well, I guess Rampaging Ferocidon, actually.
Yeah.
That beats some combo decks as well.
Big Chandra can give you an emblem and prevent you from taking infinite turns.
Yes, that's true.
But
no, honestly, by the time you're casting or Big Chandra, they've probably already taken infinite turns.
They probably have, yeah.
So, yeah, it is. I can see why you struggle against that. That's for sure.
Yeah, which, you know, the question is, you know, how many niche things do I bring in as opposed to just continuing to be a deck that is good at killing decks early? You know, do I water down that strength? Bring in more things? And so far the answer's just been, no, I just want to kill them quickly.
And I assume you also, as you were talking about earlier, you probably also are don't like to go up against decks playing 5+ Wraths.
No. Yeah, I know you like to pretend like our blue-white matchup is pretty even. I think that's just
because it used to be more even.
Yeah.
In recent metas, I've shifted to playing significantly more removal.
Yeah.
And that's probably part of why it's gotten a little easier. I think I beat you the last 2 times now.
Yeah. I think even back then you were favored against me. It just didn't feel like it because you couldn't run me over the same way you could other people.
Yeah, that's fair. And I will say Chandra Awakened Inferno is pretty good in that matchup.
My heart dropped the last time we played and you answered her. I was so demoralized.
It was great. So anyway, moving on to our next question here. Give me an example, or more than one if you have a couple, of a change that you made at one point that to pretty much any outside observer would seem weird, but you can, like you're saying earlier, you can defend your decisions. I have one that I feel like that seems weird to me.
Yeah, the word change is an interesting choice of words because I feel like what I've done to this deck hasn't really been like big changes, but like there have been things about this deck that have been weird from the beginning. Yeah. So one thing that I think surprises a lot of people whenever I lay it out is that I'm actually not running that much mana ramp. Because that's one of the things that Green is really known for, is having a bunch of different ways to put down a bunch of extra mana and cheat on one of the basic resources of Magic that way. And
yeah, I'll be honest, when I laid this out 30 minutes ago, I was like, where's the Lotus Cobra? Like, I thought you had one, but it's not here.
No, I don't think I have one, period. So what I'm running in this deck is 4 Mana Dorks and Soul Ring, which is one of my pointed cards, and that's pretty much it for mana acceleration.
Clavis is kinda there.
Yeah,
That's about it.
I do sometimes make good use out of her ability to make mana, but most of the time she's just there to drain the opponent. What I've more or less decided is that it's really nice to have these things in your opening hand. You know, I get to skip straight to turn 3, which is where my threats really start being, you know, stuff that the opponent has to deal with right away or die. But I really don't want to draw more than one of them. There aren't very many outright bad top decks in this game, or in this deck, but Llanowar Elves is definitely one of them. So I've really kept it down pretty low, just the 5, and that seems to be working out pretty well for me. I feel like I'm a deck that can win a top deck war out of nowhere by not choking up my deck with low impact stuff like that. And part of what it is I'm able to get away with that because I just have a real low curve. I have a lot of 2-drops and even more 3-drops that are all high impact and kill my opponent dead if they're not careful.
I will say, even for I agree you have a low curve, but even with your low curve, you're playing 8 4-drops and 6 5-drops, which, also, you know, when you're top decking, usually the person top decking the 4 and 5 drops is doing better than the one top decking the 2 and 3 drops.
Yeah.
So you have that option to you as well.
Yeah.
And that potential, rather.
And another thing that goes into the low number of mana dorks and mana accelerants is that I'm running a lot of lands to begin with. I counted 40 lands, including the new cards from the Return to Zendikar, Zendikar Rising, that can also be a spell. So, you know, I don't really worry about not having mana. I don't worry about Screw. I worry about Flood a little bit, but most of the time I'm able to get there.
I have a question. Do you think your 2-drops are good enough that it would be worth considering to cut a Mana Dork and replace it with a Chrome Mox?
Remind me which one Chrome Mox is?
That's the one with Imprint where you exile a card, and it makes those colors of mana. If you pitch a Clothis to it, it'll make green or red.
Yeah, I didn't really think about that. I don't...
You're down a card.
Yeah, I don't think this deck wants to 2-for-1 itself just to go faster, because the way I lose is that my threats get answered. The way I win is that I put out enough threats that they can't answer at all, so I don't really think I want to do that.
Okay.
But it is something to think about, you know, is there better or worse areas that I can, you know, eke out that win percentage in? Nicholas, you had a question?
So, you mentioned earlier that you've added a lot of cards since the COVID lockdown has kind of lifted up. So what are some of the more notable includes, either from Modern Horizons 2 or the sets leading up to it?
Yeah, I kind of went nuts buying things after the lockdown was over. That doesn't count.
That's fair.
Yeah, Ash is sorting out one of them. I alluded to it before. When one of the first changes I made was I came in and swooped in and made a bunch of swaps. Swapped out a bunch of basic lands for some of the cards in my colors that were the modal double-faced cards from Zendikar Rising. Specifically, Shatter Skull Smashing.
Got there.
Turn Timber Symbiosis and Kazandu Mammoth, which are spells on one side and lands on the other. And also Crag Crown and Timber Crown Pathway, which is just a double-faced land that enters as either a land that produces red or a land produces green. And This is part of the advantage I get to do from having a lot of lands in my deck is just like, oh, I get to turn a bunch of these into cards that can do something in certain situations, and that's one way that I really try not to run out of gas in the late game. A few other cards I've added Lalia, the Blade Reforged from the Strixhaven Commander decks.
This card is ridiculous.
This card is so nuts. So it's 2 and a red for a legendary creature Spirit Warrior. It's a 2/2 with haste. Whenever she attacks, I exile the top card of my library, and I can play that card this turn. So, first of all, she has haste, so she gets to do that right away. Second of all, it says play and not cast, so I can get lands off of that. And third of all, it synergizes well with her other ability. Whenever you exile one or more cards from your library and or your graveyard, put a +1/+1 counter on her. So she just attacks as a 3/3.
Yeah, that seems really good.
For you. Hooting Mandrills.
Or like Chandra, Torch of Defiance.
Yeah. So what?
That too.
Yeah, what Ash is and Nick are alluding to is that I have a lot of other cards in my deck that also exile cards from my library and or graveyard, which would also boost Lalia. But the nice thing about Lalia is that by herself, she attacks as a 3/3 the turn I cast her. She attacks as a 4/4 the next turn. She attacks as a 5/5 the next turn. All the time, she's exiling cards that I can play off the top of my library. So she's just extremely good by herself, which is, as I said earlier, is one of the conditions I hold my cards to. But
actually, she only does that if you have a library.
Ash is, you heard it here first, folks. Ash is threatening to exile my library. Notably, it's whenever I exile one or more cards from my library. So if Ash were to exile my library, it would not put a +1/+1 counter on Lalia.
Unfortunate.
It's quite tragic.
Yeah, and there are more cards that I've picked up from Modern Horizons 2 specifically. I picked up Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth, which, it's not necessarily doing anything too special in my deck. I don't have a lot of forest synergies, but...
you opened it, right?
Yeah, I opened 2 of them. I traded one to you and kept one for this deck. And yeah, if I have it, I'm never getting ranched on green pips. And I also picked up, this is the one I was really excited about. I opened out of my prize packs Fury. So Fury is a creature elemental incarnation for 2 red pips and 3 generic mana. So he's a 5-drop. And it is a 3/3 with double strike. When Fury enters the battlefield, it deals 4 damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures and or planeswalkers. And you can evoke it by exiling a red card from your hand. So notably, you can just cast a big old removal spell for functionally free by exiling a red card from your hand. Like I said earlier, I don't really like giving myself 2-for-1ing myself. So what I found is that I'm not evoking Fury so much as I am just casting it as a 5-drop and nuking one or more of my opponent's things and having a big dumb threat to boot. And it's been really good as that.
This is actually a card Nicholas talked
that was
about
one of the cards.
go ahead.
I was going to say the exact same thing that you were about to.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that was one of the cards that from our set review that I really liked, and I don't think Ash liked it that much. Yeah, I think the evoke mode though does go kind of underrated because you can usually just cast it, but then sometimes it just comes in clutch that you can use this free removal spell.
I did end up evoking it the other day against Ash because I needed to get his planeswalkers under control. Specifically, Elspeth was making a bunch of soldiers, and Fury could clear out a bunch of them.
And you nugged my Raveler, I think? Time Raveler?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. But, Nicholas, I was actually not going to say that. I was going to say that you made a really good point during our set review where you're not actually 2-for-1ing yourself if you're killing 2 things with this. You are, in fact, getting a fair trade on that. So, especially in the early game when people are playing their mana dorks or their smaller creatures, you could very reasonably take 2 of them out with an evoke, and then you're trading 2 for 2.
Yeah.
On your terms.
Yeah, I definitely want to be casting it for retail and getting both that creature and that removal, but having the option to evoke it is just beautiful.
I mean, it's like just better than Flametongue Cavu.
Yeah, I am also running Flametongue Cavu. It's something that I kind of have on my watch list of cards that I might replace in the future, just because you can't play it by itself.
That actually came up the other day.
Sure
But,
did. Why don't I read out Flametongue Cavu? So Flametongue Cavu is one of, like, I kind of think of it as, like, in years past, it was one of the, like, mascots of Canadian Highlander, because it's a card that its day has passed in most formats, but it really puts in work in Highlander. So it's a creature Cavu for 3 generic and a red pip, so it's a 4-drop. When it comes into play, it deals 4 damage to target creature, and it's a 4/2 creature. So ideally, you play it, you nug one of the opponent's creatures for 4 damage, and then you leave behind a 4/2 that's going to kill them real quick. The problem is, the way it's worded, it's an older card with older wording, back before WotC was really dedicated to limiting the number of feel-bad moments. So the problem is, if you play it and there's no other creatures in play, it's going to deal 4 damage to itself and die.
There is actually one time...
Honestly, the amount of times that I've played that and, like, just killed my own mana dork or something because I needed a threat, it's happened way more than I feel like it should.
Nicholas, I think it was against you, but one time someone cast a Flametongue Cavu, and I looked at the path to exile in my hand and said, well, I'd rather I have the land, so I pathed my only creature in response, and their Cavu still died, but I got the basics.
That's amazing.
That is kind of absurd.
Anyway, going back to what you're saying is, I played Solitude recently, and I evoked it once, and the fact that you can evoke it is great, but I think when these got spoiled, a lot of people thought of them just like forces, but
Yeah.
Forces, like, 9 times out of 10 you're casting forces by pitch casting them, but I found these incarnations, most of the time you just want to actually cast them, and the evoke is actually a backup.
Yeah.
And I think that's just like the way that they should be looking
I mean, yeah, because I think the thing with the force is that when you evoke it, like, it's the same outcome as if you cast it, but with this, if you cast it, you get the additional benefit of having a creature.
Yeah,
And,
that's true.
A 3/3 with double strike is a heck of an additional benefit.
Yeah, I would say so. Okay, so last written question, though I do have some other questions I thought up on the way here. But do you plan on staying on this deck for a while, or do you think there's another deck, like a completely different deck that you've kind of had your eyes on for a while, you might build and play for a while?
Yeah, the thing about me is that I'm always thinking of other different decks that I might be interested in playing, and then I just never build them. I'm a very status quo-y guy, which is why I was bumming decks off of you for so long, and why I stayed in Teamer for so long, then made a simple lateral move to this current deck from my Teamer deck. One thing I have been thinking of is building, like, the same kind of deck, but in Simic, and it's something I think I've talked to you about back before COVID. I got really lucky on a bunch of prize pack pools and pulled a bunch of the really good Simic cards that they were printing all that through that era during the Oko era. I didn't pull literal actual Oko, but I pulled Uro. I pulled that
Hydroid Crisis?
Hydroid Crisis.
Something else, too. I mean, Growth Spiral, but that's not, like, super expensive, but it's still good.
Yeah, and a Simic deck would probably play out a fair bit differently. I'd probably play, like, cantrips and creatures that cantripped and try to drown. Sorry?
Counters,
maybe a bit of counters, and try to drown my opponents in more threats rather than just better threats. But it would probably still share a lot of similarities with this current list. And maybe one day I'll build that. Maybe I'll stick with this, because I am really happy with this list. It's a good deck.
Well, there's a reason that everyone knows it. So, Nick, if you have any questions right now, go ahead. But if not, I have a couple.
Yeah, you can go ahead, and then I might have some after that.
I'm going to basically start by trying to ask the questions that I by the way, we're going to post this deck list. Whether you have it typed or if I'm going to type it later, that's fine. But I feel like we would be doing a disservice if we didn't link to the deck list as we have this episode.
I kind of figured, since I ended up making so many allusions to the different ratios that this deck is composed of, that maybe people would be interested in that.
For sure. But so I'm going to try and ask you some of the questions that I feel like viewers may be asking right now. The first one is, I noticed you're playing Magus of the Moon. Where's the Blood Moon?
Blood Moon doesn't kill people. That's that's like I could play Blood Moon in this list, and you know, Blood Moon doesn't literally kill people, but it does figuratively kill people. So you know, that wouldn't be an incorrect decision to make, but you know, like I said, threat density. Magus the Moon deals 2 damage to them each turn if they don't have any way to defend against it. And also, I don't have any way to search up Blood Moon. I have one way to search up Magus of the Moon if I want to, and probably eventually I'll add more. Right now I'm running Worldly Tutor. And there's a bunch of, like, I don't think Green Sun Zenith Green Sun Zenith just gets green creatures, right?
Yeah, only green.
Yeah.
But I could be running What's the one from War of the Spark?
Finale of Devastation?
Finale of Devastation. Maybe one of these days I'll get my hands on that. But
follow-up question.
Mm-hmm.
How does Cinder Vines kill people?
Okay, so I do run a few cards that are purely for some form of card advantage, or purely for some kind of very specifically attacking someone on a very specific axis. And why don't I go ahead and read Cinder Vines, because
people might not know that one.
If I haven't played this against you, you probably don't know it. So Cinder Vines is an enchantment for a red and a green, so exactly Gruul. Whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, Cinder Vines deals 1 damage to that player. And then I can pay 1 generic mana and sacrifice Cinder Vines to destroy target artifact or enchantment. Cinder Vines deals 2 damage to that permanent's controller. So, reading the card explains the card. Cinder Vines kills the opponent by dealing 1 damage to them whenever they cast a non-creature spell. There are 6 creature types, or there are
6 card types that are not.
Yeah, I say that, and now I realize that it doesn't actually work with lands, but there are 5 card types.
No, but it works with tribal, there's no card that's only tribal.
True.
Right.
It's, you know, Cinder Vines is very much there to be specifically artifact and enchantment removal, but to do it in a way that also has broader applications. So, like, if you're coming at me with your control deck and you want to cast a bunch of cantrips, well, you're going to have to pay for that with your life.
Also, I suppose it does beat Storm pretty well, and it does beat Infinite Turn decks pretty well.
Yeah. I seem to recall, am I remembering this correctly, that the other day when we played, you actually used a removal spell on it?
Okay, listen.
Which I'm not saying that was wrong.
I think I was going to go to discard, so I was like,
that might be
I'm going to spend this on the Cinder Vines that's really pissing me off. But nonetheless, I did use a removal spell on it.
Yeah, that's not quite as embarrassing as Nicholas's Cinder Vines story, but
Wait, Nicholas, please tell me the Cinder Vines story. I don't think I've heard it.
Basically, I demonic tutored for Umezawa's Jite, forgetting that he could just Cinder Vines my Jite, so I ended up dealing 2 damage to myself to find the Jite, spending 6 mana to tutor for it, cast it, and equip it, and then he just blew it up and dealt 2 more damage to me.
Wait.
It was quite tragic.
Wait, he had a mana up this whole time?
Oh, yeah.
Onboard tricks, my guys. Onboard tricks.
Man. Oh, okay.
Yep.
You want to know the worst onboard trick I got by?
Yes.
I was playing eggs against someone. They were playing Sultai midrange or Sultai control, kinda. And I'm I'm like sometimes when you're on an eggs or a Stormlight combo deck and your opponent has a piece of interaction in play, you just like have to like tank so hard to figure out how to get out of the situation. So my opponent had an opposition agent in play. And I'm looking at my hand of 2 tutors and 2 different onboard tutors.
Oh, God.
Right? And I have like a ton of stuff on play. I'm trying to figure out how I win from here, right? So I tank for literally like 5 minutes. Like I don't make a game action for like 5 minutes. And eventually I'm just like, oh okay, cast Fabricate. And he reaches for my deck and I'm like, what are you doing? And he just points at his opposition agent and I'm like, oh. And then he goes against Black Lotus.
That was me, wasn't it?
No, it was Wyatt. But I go.
You did something similar against me.
Apparently I can't play against opposition agent. But the point is, he took Black Lotus out of my deck.
I remember
and
that.
And then I proceeded to win on the next turn. Through a counter spell that he paid for with Black Lotus. But I got there. Anyway, yeah, that's it. That's the disgusting situation that happened to me. I don't think I have any more questions about the list besides maybe the Arlen Cord situation.
Okay, I should have brought the box that I keep Arlen Cord in. So
did you forget what she does?
I mean, there's much of what she does. Yeah, so
she does a lot of things.
Yeah, I have like 5 checklist cards in this deck, so I keep so I have a box where I keep my tokens, and that's where I keep the actual cards that I do own for these double face cards.
I went ahead and pulled Arlen Cord up, so I can go ahead and read it real quick.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so Arlen Cord is a planeswalker for 2, a red and a green. Comes in at 3 loyalty and has a +1 that says, until end of turn, up to 1 target creature gets +2/+2 and gains vigilance and haste. And then it has a 0 ability that says, put a 2/2 green wolf creature token onto the battlefield and then transform Arlen Cord. And the transform side has a +1 that says, until end of turn, up to 1 target creature gets +2/+2 and gains... Oh wait, no. A +1 that says, all creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain trample until end of turn. And then a -1 that says, Arlen Embraced by the Moon deals 3 damage to target creature or player, and then you transform Arlen back. Or a -6 that says, you get an emblem with creatures you control have haste, and you can tap the creature and have this creature deal damage equal to its power to target creature or player.
So Arlen Cord is a bit of a... I can see why you would consider it a bit of a weird include, because, like, who else plays this card? Well, the reason why I want to play Arlen Cord is her front face +1, which gives target creature +2/+2 vigilance and haste. My deck is playing a lot of creatures, but it's actually not playing a lot of haste creatures, which might be surprising for red-green specifically, but, like, being haste eats up a decent bit of power from the card, so like you get to play more powerful creatures if they don't have haste, and also like +2/+2 and vigilance. That's a real big game. So that's what I like having Arlen Cord on the battlefield for. But the reason I get to play Arlen Cord is because of her 0, which makes a 2/2 green wolf, and then I can, on the other side, I can -1 to lightning bolt an opponent or creature. This is actually probably creature, player, or planeswalker with the great update.
Yeah, I think it's any target.
Yeah. So like Arlen Cord can stand on her own. She can come down and make a 2/2, and now I have power and toughness on the board, and but she also just synergizes well with all of these different cards that I'm playing that really want more power, more toughness, and haste, specifically haste. And I can see Ash going through my deck right now and looking at
haste creatures.
Yeah.
So I got 9 right here that do have haste. Does Handwearer Garrison have haste?
No.
Okay, so that one doesn't have haste. And then I also set aside Wildborn Preserver because it doesn't have haste. You still have to wait the next turn, but you get to dodge removal with it.
Yeah.
So you get that amount of haste.
Yeah. So, and some of the cards that I see you've included here don't actually have haste, but they make creature tokens with haste. My Goblin-y Boys, Goblin Rabble Master, and Legion Warboss.
Yeah, so realistically, you're only playing 7 creatures that literally actually have haste.
Yeah. So, like, you curve Arlen Cord into Thragtusk, and that's living the dream. You get to attack with a 7/5 Vigilance Haste creature that punishes them if they do manage to stack up enough behind it to kill it in combat.
You don't feel like a better threat than that would be the Arlen Cord into Fury?
That would also be extremely sweet. I don't know why I pulled Thragtusk out of my head as the first thing I thought of, but no, the actual nuts combo is Arlen Cord curved into Glorybringer. So Glorybringer is a creature dragon for red pip 3 generic. So he's a 5-drop. So you can curve him immediately after you've played Arlen Cord. It has flying and haste. Wait a minute, Chad. I thought you liked Arlen Cord giving haste to creatures who don't have haste. Well, just hold up a minute. When Glorybringer attacks, you may exert it. When you do, it deals 4 damage to target non-dragon creature an opponent controls. So the deal with exert is a keyword action, which means this creature does not untap next turn. But that doesn't matter if it doesn't tap to attack in the first place, and Arlen Cord can give Glorybringer Vigilance. So you just get to attack each turn with a 6/6 flying Vigilance creature who burns out one of their creatures for 4 damage every time you do that.
That kills a lot of stuff.
Not dragons, but
some of them. For example, Glorybringer. Oh wait, no, it says non-dragon.
That's what I was alluding to.
Question is, are you ever going to try and target my Realm Walker with it?
Oh, I don't know off the top of my head what Realm Walker is.
All you need to know is it is a good creature that has Changeling.
Well, then I probably can't.
But you would try, though.
It would be an illegal game action, but I might try depending on how deceptive the art was.
It looks like an elf. Some Kaldheim. Anyway, so Nick, do you have any more questions? Because if not, I think we can move on to our final segment.
Not necessarily a question. I don't think we've actually mentioned this yet, but it is important to note that Chad's deck is, I'm not going to say budget, but it doesn't have some of the really high-end cards that it could, and yet it's still just one of the strongest decks in our meta. He just kills people with it all the time out of nowhere.
If I can piggyback off of that, this is not at all to discount your skill. You play this deck very, very well. Do not think that we mean you don't. But yeah, you are entirely correct, Nicholas. I'm looking at it, and actually, you are on, unless I'm missing something, you are on 4 points. Those points are Soul Ring. This deck could, for free, points-wise, just play a Mox Ruby and a Mox Emerald.
Yes, and if I were rich enough to conceive of owning a Mox Ruby and a Mox Emerald, those probably would be great includes. Worldly Tutor isn't points. Was it pointed at some point?
It used to be, and no longer
It
is.
was, but it's not anymore.
Yeah.
You could also just be playing Mana Crypt, which just seems really good in your deck.
There is a lot of Ancient Tomb mana.
Yeah, I am playing Ancient Tomb now. But yeah, it's there. And there are other pointed cards that I could be playing that are more or less I'm not playing because I don't own them. I could be playing Jite. I'm probably not actually a fast bond deck because that just
that card's not pointed anymore.
Right.
You could maybe be a pop deck.
Which one's pop?
Price
of Progress.
Yeah.
I probably do just want to get a Price of Progress at some point.
Late is actually, depending on how the early game gone, could just win. But
I am running a lot of non-basics myself.
I mean, yeah, but I've played Price of Progress in a 4-color deck before. The thing is, if you're killing them faster than they're killing you, it kind of doesn't matter.
It kind of doesn't matter.
Especially because you fetch basics a lot. Right?
I really don't. What I find myself fetching most of the time. So So this is probably a good thing to talk about. My mana base is kind of weird. I feel like I'm going against popular popular Canlander thought by running actually a lot of lands that come into play tapped, but do things. So the ones that come to mind are the 4 man lands that I'm running. I'm running Raging Ravine, Treetop Village, Mishra's Factory, and Get to Encampments.
Well, Factory comes in untapped.
Okay, Factory.
It is colorless, though.
Yeah.
Factory is
and
untapped.
I'm also running Ketria Triome always comes into play tapped. Sheltered Thicket comes into play tapped. And what I've found playing this deck is that everybody goes on about how you really want your lands to come into play untapped, and the modification to that I found by getting my reps in is that you really want to have access to lands that come into play tapped, because like turn 1 I'm not actually running a lot of 1-drops, so if I play a tapped land on turn 1 then that doesn't matter, and then if I have a 2-drop then I really do want that untapped land so I can play that 2-drop on turn 2. So I feel like I'm playing a bit more of a mix than a lot of players of stuff that just does not enter untapped. I'm playing the green-red Temple, which comes into play tapped and scries when it enters, but I really feel like I don't get punished for it because I'm extremely cognizant of my lands and having them come into play tapped when I want them to. And part of that is, to get back to the original point that brought us here, a lot of the time I'm fetching specifically for Ketria Triome and Sheltered Thicket, which give me both of my pips of mana, but must come into play tapped. And by fetching them out of my deck, I'm not going to get blindsided by having a turn where I draw them, but I really wanted to draw an untapped land.
Fair. So do you think it has? Do you think it does that kind of mindset of like people wanting to always have the lands enter untapped? Do you think that has to do with some decks, especially more reactive control or sometimes combo decks, where it's really important what cards in their hand they're playing, so they have to be able to cast, like they have to be able to cast this 3-drop on 3 or this 4-drop on 4. But for you, because a lot of your cards fill the role of threat that kills them, it kind of like you could play a tap land on 4 and just not cast your 4-drop that turn, just play another good 3-drop.
I think that's part of it. Although that element of it gets a little downplayed in Highlander just because we're all playing 100 card piles and who knows what we're going to draw. Sure. I think the other big thing that distinguishes my deck from other decks in that way is just, I had a thought and I'm just not putting it together.
We can cut it out if we have to. It's fine.
I've come up with it. The other thing is that I'm just playing so many lands. I'm playing over 40 lands, so when I draw an opening hand, I just have options. So as long as I'm strategically playing out the one enters tapped land on a very specific turn, then I have like 3 other untapped lands that I can work with so that I can curve out when and where I want to.
Okay. I think that's about all I had, Nick.
Yeah, I think we're ready to go to our closing segment.
All right. So you probably know it by now, but our closing segment is where we talk about the most recent deck we played.
Which
I think we may skip you.
Yeah, for Chad, I think we've done that for the past hour and 3 minutes.
So we'll let you sit this one out. But the most recent deck that I played. Wait, hold on. What did I play? So we started playing Highlander twice a week now. Recently, we've our store has been running Highlander events twice a week. So I'll just briefly talk about what I played both days then. Tuesday I played Blue White Control, which I've talked about a decent amount now. This is where we alluded to our matchup this week, and I was playing Blue White Control that day. And
yeah, it was a really tight series of games, and Ash eventually came out on top with by answering all of my threats with board wipes and then playing threats of his own that I couldn't deal with.
Which I would like to point out, I won that match in turn 5 of turns in game 3. So, like, it was really close.
It was close.
And then